She speaks Sicilian better than your mother ever did.
You think you can serve us just because you're gorgeous and black? The words cut through the air in the ballroom like glass breaking on stone. Everyone stopped talking. Everyone looked. Kiana Ellis stopped in the middle of her steps, and the silver tray she was holding shook a little. A drop of champagne ran down her wrist, but she didn't move. The laughter that had been echoing through the Moretti home just a few seconds before turned into an unsettling silence. A violin ceased playing in the back. Savannah, Georgia, where the rich smelt like old money and new secrets. Don Moretti, the Sicilian-born head of one of America's most influential business families, had a big birthday party tonight. His son, rich tech CEO Luca Moretti, had spared no cost. Under crystal chandeliers that could have paid off Kiana's tuition loans 10 times over, politicians, athletes, and even movie stars shone. But no one shone brighter than Kiana, a young black waitress with perfect skin, a smile that could melt hearts, and eyes that showed both strength and terror. The immaculate white uniform fit her nicely, and her braids were neatly tucked under her cap. Even when people looked down on her, she was taught to work twice as hard and stand twice as tall. And they were right now. She heard them murmur behind their glasses of wine from abroad. Who let her in here? Looks like diversity hiring is getting brave these days. But Kiana kept going, calm and steady, with her heart beating like a drum of resistance. She had no idea that one simple thing was going to change everything in her life. No one saw what happened next when Don Moretti turned to her and spoke quickly in Old Sicilian. Kiana answered him well in the same accent. Her voice was silky, polite, and rich of history. Everyone in the room stopped. A black waiter had just spoken the lost language of Sicily better than anyone else in the room. And from then on, nothing in her life or theirs will ever be the same. This is a black narrative about pride, power, and the truth that can't stay hidden forever. You're watching Hidden Worth, a show that reminds us that value isn't necessarily what we can see. Stay with me. This is just the beginning. Kiana Ellis didn't grow up in a world of chandeliers and whispered threats. She grew up in a shotgun house on the edge of Treme, New Orleans. It was a neighborhood where the air smelled of gumbo and hardship. Music came out of open windows, and people still said hello by name. Her mom worked at the hospital at night. Her father? She was gone before she could say her first word, but she was never by herself. Technically, her grandmother, Nonna Maria, wasn't blood. Miss Maria from down the block took Kiana in after her real grandma died. A Sicilian widow with white hair, a cane, and a temper. Her kitchen usually smelled like something was cooking. She taught Kiana how to make ricotta from scratch, how to roll pasta so thin you could see through it, and how to speak her childhood language, Sicilian dialect, which is harsh and lovely. "Learn it, baby," she'd say as she stirred a pot of red sauce. It's not just words, it's a key, a shield, a sword. Kiana never truly got what she meant until tonight. Savannah had been a new beginning. She was studying hospitality management at Armstrong University and taking side jobs to pay for food for herself and Nonna. She answered yes right away when the Moretti estate called her catering company and asked for help with their patriarch's 75th birthday. $300 for one night of work? She would have said yes twice. The Moretti estate was like a castle in the middle of Georgia's steamy, mossy woods. Gates made of wrought iron that are taller than most houses. The driveway is full of expensive cars. Everyone on staff had been told not to make eye contact with the guests, not to listen in on them, and not to talk to Don Moretti unless he talked to them first. Of course, no one said what to do if he talked to you in a dialect that most linguists couldn't understand, let alone answer. Kiana was different because of that. Not simply the hue of her skin or the way she walked with confidence, but also the secret weapon she didn't even know she had. She didn't plan to speak Sicilian when she walked into that ballroom. She strolled in hoping to make enough money to pay for Nana's medicine and maybe fix the gearbox on her old Nissan. But sometimes, fate doesn't knock, it kicks the door open. And when it does, you need to be ready. As soon as Kiana walked through the side door of the Moretti home, she knew she didn't belong. It wasn't simply the high ceilings or the gold-plated mirrors that showed off ancient money and power. People's eyes skimmed over her like she was a piece of furniture or, worse, something that had been lost. The other servers were Caucasian, well-groomed, and clearly chosen for more than just their experience. Kiana noticed the change in energy right away when she knotted her apron. The quiet surrounding her wasn't neutral. It was heavy. Be careful. Even though no one stated it out loud, it was evident that she didn't suit the brand. She kept her chin up and moved with studied grace though, with a smile on your face and a tray in your hand. This wasn't the first time she had to deal with a room full of people who didn't think she could understand or speak the language. She moved through the crowd like a ghost in the light, until she walked by a group of women in high-end clothes, their diamonds sparkling in the light of the chandeliers above. When she got close, they stopped talking. One of them glanced her over with a sneer that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't know they got help from Bourbon Street," she said to her buddy, pretending to drink her champagne. Kiana didn't move. She had heard worse things. Still, her gut constricted, and she walked to the next visitor with the grace of a robot. She was taught not to respond. But that didn't mean she didn't feel it. Then a man in a tailored navy suit walked in. He was in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair, and a tan that screamed Palm Beach money. He stood in her way in the middle of the room. "Are you sure you should be here, dear?" he asked, raising his eyebrows, and spoke loudly enough to get people's attention. A couple of people close laughed. She said what she usually does. "Sir, would you like a glass of champagne?" His smile got sharp. "You think you can work for us just because you're gorgeous and black?" There it was, the line that made the air shatter like thunder. Everyone in the room stopped talking. Forks stopped in midair. Someone dropped a wine glass near the string quartet. Kiana's hands didn't shake, but something inside her did. She opened her mouth to speak, but a voice that was raspy, old, and clearly Sicilian beat her to it. Don Moretti had turned his chair around in the front of the room. His cane hit the marble as he spoke to her in a language that no one else in the room expected to hear. And when Kiana answered easily, eloquently, as if she had grown up in the hills of Sicily, it wasn't just the air that froze. Everyone had just given up on her. The girl they were trying to make smaller had just made herself impossible to ignore. For a short time, no one knew what to do, not even Kiana. The words came out of her mouth as naturally as breathing. They were formed by memories of her grandmother murmuring Sicilian lullabies to her while she kneaded bread in their modest New Orleans kitchen. She didn't try to make a point. She only wanted to show respect to the man who was clearly the most important person in the room. But that respect did something that no one saw coming. Don Moretti leaned forward in his chair and squinted his eyes, not with doubt, but with understanding. The deep sort, the kind you can't get from guest lists or resumes, but from bloodlines and echoes of something old. He pointed at her with his cane, and when he spoke, his voice was no longer casual and detached. "Your pronunciation, it's from Palermo. The hills, not the city." Kiana slowly nodded. "My grandma was born in a village close to Bulgaria. She took care of me. She taught me how to speak the language." He looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then he spoke again, but not in English. In Sicilian. Sicilian from the past. The kind you couldn't find on Google or a language software. Kiana didn't think twice before answering. And just like that, the whole party changed. The snickering, sideways glances, and smug superiority were all gone. People were still looking, but with a different kind of excitement. Confusion, wanting to know more, and for some people in the crowd, worry. There was a heavy stillness, and Don Moretti's laugh was slow, methodical, and entirely out of place. He tapped the cane on the floor once. "Come here, girl. Sit next to me." Kiana hesitated and looked at her boss, whose face had gone ghostly pale. He mouthed a scared, "No," but Don Moretti waved him away like a fly. "She respects my home more than half the people in this room," he shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And she tells the truth about our family better than any of you." Every step Kiana took toward the head table made her feel heavier. She knew how this looked, understood what it meant to cross the line between helpful and respecting guests. She also knew she had to say yes. Don Moretti leaned in and asked, "What's your name, ragazza?" while she sat next to him. "Kiana Ellis," she said, her voice steady even though her ribs were hurting. This time, his smile was softer. "Ellis might not be Sicilian, but your blood tells stories that no last name ever could." Kiana was no longer a server after that. She was a visitor. A sentence. A issue. And for some people in the room, it was a threat. Luca Moretti came without making a sound, like if he had come out of nowhere. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, wore a midnight suit that fit him perfectly, and had a presence that made others stand up straighter, even if they didn't know why. When he walked in, Kiana saw that discussions stopped not because he asked them to, but because something about him did. He walked approaching the head table with a glass of red wine in hand. His face was unreadable as he took in the scene. His father sitting next to a black waitress, the staff immobilized, and the guests murmuring behind their napkins. Moretti looked up and grinned. "Come meet someone important, Luca." Kiana's heart rate went up. It was there again, that word. Very important. Luca looked at her, and for a long second, he didn't say anything. Just looked. Not in a disrespectful or intrusive way. But it was like he was trying to fit in a piece of a puzzle he didn't even know was missing. Then he calmly reached out his hand. He said, "Luca Moretti," in a silky voice. "Kiana Ellis." They shook hands firmly but quickly, but the electricity stayed. He said, "My father seems to like you," in a neutral tone, but there was something beneath his words. "I just talked to him in his own language. That was enough," Kiana said with a soft smile. Luca lifted an eyebrow. "Sicilian, huh?" "Palermitan dialect," Don Moretti said with pride. "From the hills. Her grandmother's family comes from Bulgaria." That made something flash in Luca's eyes. Not a big shock. Something more like recognition. He looked at Kiana. "Did your grandma ever talk about a woman named Livia?" Kiana blinked. "Yes. That was her sister. My great-aunt. She died before I was born. Why?" Luca carefully sat down across from her, and his mood changed. Now it's more personal, not as careful. "Because Livia was my grandma." The table looked like it was getting smaller for a moment, and the air was full of invisible threads tugging two pasts together. Kiana sat still. "That would make us cousins," Luca said gently at the end. "Second cousins." I knew the name Ellis rang a bell. My dad used to talk about Elisabetta Ferraro, who was Livia's sister. She said she went to America and then disappeared. Kiana swallowed hard, and her whole body froze. Elisabetta was the name of my grandmother. Don Moretti leaned back and looked like he knew something. He added, "The bloodline comes full circle." After all this time, Kiana could hardly hear the string quartet start up again. The celebration came back to life, but things would never be the same. She had come in as a waitress. Now she was at the family table. Through blood. By inheritance. And maybe, by chance. The whispers started almost right after the champagne stopped fizzing. The crew was buzzing behind the velvet curtains and in the dark hallways of the old Boston home. They weren't gossiping, they were warning. One of the bartenders murmured, "She doesn't know who she's sitting with," as he stuffed a towel into a champagne bucket. "That girl is messing with power she can't understand." "She's just a server," whispered another, shaking his head. "Sure, a gorgeous face. But even beautiful things may be dangerous when they come into the wrong legacy." The kitchen was getting darker. Trina, the head of the catering team, slammed a tray down on the stainless steel counter. She snapped, "I told her to stay in the back. I don't care if she speaks 12 different sorts of Italian. She was employed to work, not to hang out." But Mr. Moretti himself asked her to sit at the head table. A younger server replied shyly, "And she's family." Trina laughed. "Family? Don't be foolish. You believe that people like them would embrace someone like her just because they had a great-grandparent in common?" That made the room quiet. The meaning of someone like her hung in the air like smoke. In the corridor near the wine cellar, two well-dressed men were talking in quiet Italian. They hadn't taken their eyes off Kiana all night. One person said, "She's a liability. A black woman walking in off the street and sitting next to the Don like she belongs. You don't think the other families will talk?" The other man, who was older and colder, answered without looking, "Yes, they are. And if she stays on his good side, the whole New York board will perceive it as a sign of weakness. Then we get rid of the weakness." "No." The elder man's voice got cold. "We don't touch her. That would make Luca angry. And Luca isn't like his dad. He doesn't forgive. Luca stood beside a huge window that looked out over the garden in another part of the estate. His jaw was stiff, and his phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You brought a waitress into the circle of blood. Brave, but being brave makes enemies. He didn't answer. But his thumb was close to the block button. Don Moretti was quietly laughing at the head table down the hall as he poured Kiana a glass of wine, as if he had been waiting decades for this very moment. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. He knew what was going on in the room, and he knew what was going to happen. The old guard wouldn't let this go. Not without blood or leverage. The chilly air outside in Boston stung the cheeks of visitors who were arriving, but the temperature inside the house plummeted for a completely different reason. They came in quiet. 3 black SUVs, which were not marked but were easy to see, slid up the long stone road like shadows. No valet would go near. The motors stopped, and 6 men got out. They were all wearing perfectly fitted charcoal suits with no ties and no grins. They moved in perfect synchronization, as if they had practiced this entry 100 times. Vincenzo Falco went through them, surrounded by them like a prize no one could touch. The Falco name meant something different from the Moretti name. Don Moretti had created his quiet power via tradition and silent threats. The Falcos, on the other hand, had built their empire through violence and secrecy. Vincenzo was the youngest and most dangerous of the Falco sons. He was smooth, charming, and had no morals at all. When he walked into the main hall, discussion stopped and a murmur went through the celebration. Luca even stiffened when he saw him, but he quickly hid it under a gulp of whiskey. Don Moretti's smile stopped. Kiana could feel it before she saw it, the change in energy, the eyes darting toward the door, and the room going silent. She turned around, and for a second, she couldn't breathe. Vincenzo's eyes met hers. He looked at her with an uncomfortable amount of fascination, like a wolf looking at an unexpected guest at a blood feast. Vincenzo said, well, in a voice that was smooth, like velvet over broken glass. I thought I was late. It turns out that the show is just starting. He strolled up to the main table with a confidence that made others either scared or angry. No one came to greet him. Not even the Don. Luca was the first to move, calmly standing between Kiana and Vincenzo. You weren't invited, Vincenzo. And yet, Vincenzo continued as he drank from a half-empty glass of someone else's wine. I always find a way in, don't I? He looked at Kiana again. And who are you? The new translator for the Don? Or maybe something more personal? Kiana didn't move. She had been insulted before. But this wasn't simply shade. It was a plan. I'm exactly who I need to be, she remarked in a low voice. And you know that scares you. The room held its breath. Vincenzo smiled slowly and dangerously. You are brave. Women who are brave often get tired of things quickly in our environment. But hey, flames are beautiful while they last. And just like that, the true conflict started. It wasn't about land or trade routes. It was about a woman who had the guts to speak the language of power in a chamber that wasn't meant for her voice. And not everyone was ready for what happened next. The Moretti estate was silent hours later, but there was still a lot of tension in the air, like smoke after a fire. A skeleton crew and a few close friends were still sipping from glasses that hadn't been touched. Most of the visitors had already left. The chandeliers overhead shed a soothing light, yet the shadows felt darker now. Kiana was alone in the library, and she was there more out of instinct than invitation. The chamber smelled like cedar, ink, and old powder. There were leather-bound books and things from the past on shelves that went all the way up to the ceiling. She ran her fingertips along the spine of an old Italian history book till she felt something that didn't belong there. A crest. It was carved into the wood toward the bottom of a bookshelf. It was old and almost forgotten. It was the same as the insignia on the ring that Don Moretti kissed earlier that night. But there was something else, something that felt familiar. Her heart raced. Kiana leaned in and pushed on the wooden crest. The bookshelf creaked and moved with a faint click, revealing a short nook behind it. The dust moved around in the air like ghosts waking up. There was a little table inside, and on top of it was an old leather journal tied with worn red thread. She lifted it up carefully. The letters on the cover took her breath away. Empress. With shaking hands, she opened the book. The first page was a handwritten letter in a fancy Italian dialect, not normal Italian, but she knew it. The way her granny spoke. The letter wasn't meant for Don Moretti. It came from a woman named Mariella Falco to a child she had never met. Her. Kiana. Luca's voice disturbed the quiet. He was looking for her. She glanced around, her eyes wide and her journal held to her chest. I found something, she said in a low voice. I think this was my great-grandmother's. It talks about a kid who went to America during the war. About keeping her secure. About a bloodline that connects the Morettis to the Falcos. Luca's face went from shock to understanding to something deeper. He said, my grandfather used to talk about a lost heir. Someone who comes from both bloodlines. Hidden to keep her safe from her foes. Was your granny from Palermo? Kiana slowly nodded. Luca ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of generations on his shoulders. He said, this isn't just a discovery. This changes everything. She had more than just a journal in her hands. It was a gift. And a target painted on her whole family tree. The next 48 hours went by in a flash. Kiana hardly remembered being pushed into the back seat of a dark SUV with Luca next to her, his jaw set in stillness. Don Moretti had told them to hurry. People had heard about the discovery of the journal. No one noticed. Whether it was the workers or the cameras, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Kiana was no longer safe in public. They drove for hours until the bright skyline of Chicago was no longer in front of them. The car finally came to a stop in a peaceful, wooded area in the hills near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It appeared like a wellness retreat from the outside, peaceful, opulent, and calm. But what went on inside those walls was everything but relaxing. Kiana was going to get some training. Not in manners or business etiquette, but in how to stay alive. Before she went, Don Moretti had warned her, you got more than a last name. You've gotten enemies, duties, and power from your parents. You need to learn how to keep them all safe. The first day started at 5 a.m. The first thing to learn? Being aware of your surroundings. Nora, a former CIA field operative, was in charge. She was short, thin, and sharp as a knife, and she didn't waste any time. She informed Kiana, before your name is ever in someone's crosshairs, your face will be. So learn how to read a room, learn how to get out of one faster. There were drills with obstacles, fighting with rubber knives, making tactical decisions when you're under pressure. Luca came to see her most afternoons to teach her the language of power, how to deal with sharks without getting hurt. Kiana studied at night. Italian dialects, feuds between Sicilian families, the whole family history that Don Moretti had found, now on encrypted tablets. She wasn't only learning how to stay alive, she was getting ready to lead. The exercise, nevertheless, did have an effect. Every night, her muscles hurt, her fingers shook, but not because she was scared, she was tired. But when she looked in the mirror, something was different. The girl who used to avoid angry words and clean tables was now taller, her sight firmer, and her voice sharper. Luca saw it too. He commented one night as they sat by the fire pit after sparring, "You're not the same person you used to be, and that's a good thing." Kiana smiled a little, her wounded knuckles lying on her lap. She said, "I can't be that girl anymore. Not with what's coming." Vincenzo and his friends were observing from the shadows outside the compound. Waiting. And the next time they met, Kiana wouldn't simply be the waitress with a grin. She would be a Moretti. And she would be ready. 3 weeks after Kiana got to the facility, she got the call. It wasn't from Don Moretti, not from Luca, not even Nora. Vincenzo personally sent it. His speech was smooth and pleasant, yet there was something frigid beneath it, like ice moving around in a fancy tumbler of whiskey. He said, "We both know this can't go on forever. Let's have a talk." Kiana's heart raced, but her voice stayed calm. "Give it a name." He picked a neutral place, the Argonne Club, a fancy men's club in downtown Milwaukee. Rooms that are private. No pictures, no public entrance without permission. Only one guard would come from each side. It was clear. If there was any evidence of violence, everyone in the underground would know who breached the rules. Luca still complained as soon as she hung up. "This is a trap." Kiana calmly put a knife in her boot and said, "No, it's a chance." The chamber was dark, and the walls were lined with old Scotch and Italian literature. Vincenzo stood by the window, looking out over the lake with his hands in his pockets. When she walked in, he turned around. His face looked younger than she thought it would, but his eyes seemed old. He smiled and remarked, "So, this is the girl who made the Moretti name scary again." Kiana sat down. "And you're the guy who's scared of a waitress." He chuckled, and it was clear he was having fun. But the game had begun. He said, "You know why I wanted to meet with you. You've brought back old ghosts, claimed land, made a lot of noise. It's not going to last." Kiana said, "I'm not asking for permission. The legacy is mine. The contracts, the transportation routes, and the respect." Vincenzo's eyes got smaller. "That ledger doesn't guarantee safety or faithfulness. You may have the deed, but I have the fear." She responded gently, "And I hold the bloodline, and the press, and the government. Want to be loud? Go ahead." He looked at her without saying anything, then leaned back. "What do you want to offer?" Kiana put a little envelope on the table. "It's not an offer. It's a sign. Stay away from Charleston and New Orleans. Let the Moretti name bring back what your father attempted to get rid of. Or I let those files go." Vincenzo took the envelope out. There were pictures, account numbers, and a full list of how his family was involved in human trafficking in the 1,990 seconds, things that even his own officers didn't know. He didn't say anything for a whole minute. Then, with a frigid smile, "I thought you were more dangerous than you are." Kiana got up. "Good, now do what you need to do." Kiana didn't have much time to think on the win before everything fell apart. When she got back to the safe house in Kenosha that night, the front door was open. Her senses came to life. She carefully walked inside, her fingertips brushing against the hidden gun under her coat. The lights were off, no noise. It just smells like gun oil and lavender. "Luca," she yelled out. "Hey," in a forceful voice. "Be quiet." Then there was a soft clink, metal on tile. She ran to the kitchen, but then she stopped. It was a mess. Dishes broke, chairs are upside down, blood small drops leading to the back hallway. Her heart raced. That's when she noticed it. A phone on the floor, buzzing quietly. She got it. A message came up on the screen. He put his faith in the wrong person. She felt panic rise as she looked at the security feed. All cameras are off, files gone, except just one. She did it, and her stomach turned. It showed Nora. Quietly and carefully, they turned off the perimeter grid, letting in 2 people with masks on. One of them was Vincenzo's enforcer. There was no doubt that the other person was Carlo Morales, Luca's cousin. The betrayal hurt more than gunshots. Carlo was the one who helped Kiana figure out the ledger. Carlo who brought her lunch during long strategy meetings. Carlo responded, "Your family now." And Nora, she was the first person to believe in Kiana, had coached her with her pronunciation and told her stories about Don Moretti when he was a kid. She had been sitting next to Kiana's grandmother, held her hand. The video finished with Luca being pulled out of the cellar, barely awake. Kiana felt something deep and instinctual rise in her chest. Not fear. Decide. She took the old duffel that was stashed under the floorboards. It had cash, burner phones, and a tracker put into the clasp of Luca's watch. Since their last expedition, he had insisted on wearing it. The signal was weak but could be found, going west. Kiana's phone rang again. Another message. "End this softly, and your people will leave. Keep going, and we'll burn everything." She looked at the screen. Her jaw got stiff. In response, she typed one sentence. "You started the fire. Now watch me set the falsehoods on fire." She got ready by putting the dagger Luca gave her into its sheath. The few people she could trust were either gone or in trouble. Not herself. She strode out into the night, her shadow extended on the snow. she knew one thing for sure. Now this war was personal. Kiana stood alone on the roof of the historic Moretti warehouse in Milwaukee, which is now a museum of cultural memory. The chilly wind from Lake Michigan sliced into her cheeks. People inside were raising their glasses to the new partnership, Ferraro, Moretti, and a new foundation named after her grandmother, the Elisabetta Foundation for Immigrant Women. But Kiana wasn't ready to celebrate yet. It had taken 3 months of non-stop preparation, secret rescues, and risky confrontations to break apart the Morales-Russo alliance that had turned against them. She had followed them across 3 states, survived an ambush in a rail yard outside Des Moines, and outsmarted them in a fake ledger auction that revealed their duplicity to both the federal government and the ancient families. Luca had barely made it out alive. He was getting better slowly, but every time he smiled at her with quiet pride, it reminded her why she had battled so hard. But tonight was more than just a victory lap. It was the end. Don Moretti was standing next to her now, and his hand was resting on hers. Your grandma would be proud. You did things your way, not only to safeguard her legacy. With honor. Kiana smiled, even if her eyes hurt a little. She always said, "The blood that flows in us does not define us. The choices we make when no one is watching do." People of all races and backgrounds, including Black, White, Italian, and Latinx, mixed in the gathering below, exchanging food, tales, and music. The same people who used to ignore her now praised her. Not because she was like everyone else, but because she was different. Under Kiana's guidance, the Moretti Empire, which used to be secretive and shrouded in shadows, now stood for openness, fairness, and variety. The ledger, which used to be a sign of power hoarded, had been changed into a digital record for learning and economic fairness. Also, the taunts and mocking laughter that night had long since stopped. What stayed was a legacy, a real legacy, not based on control, but on connection. If Kiana's tale makes you think about your own strength and worth, don't just scroll past it. If you like this tale, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment indicating where you're watching from. You never know whose life might alter just because they realize they matter. This is Hidden Worth, where tales that have never been told get the attention they deserve. And what about Kiana? She's just getting started.